cost my life, I has to fight.
What's poppin' with the population? It's another episode of Do-Rag with the Cape Roll with your host, me, Dre. This is another installment.
No. I remember it because it was super embarrassing. It was SpongeBob with the do-rag on, cape out and all. Yeah, really wish we made some different choices. At least tuck it in.
No, I've been gone for a minute, but I'm back with the jump off. Goons in the club, in case something jumps off. And no, that is an ode to the Little Kim verse, and the goons I am talking about is not the same goons that people seem to be talking about today. Nevertheless, there's been a lot going on in the news. Obviously, if you live within the borders of the colony that is North America, you know that there's a new face of empire that seems to be operating from an accelerationist standpoint, although a lot of the aspects of what they're doing is nothing different from what was going on before. It just was a little quieter. But with accelerationist principles, you tend to want to get things done faster. Nevertheless, a lot of what's going on is cannon fodder plus real things happening. So since you're being overstimulated, you don't know what to follow. And if you allow yourself to only read the headlines of news, you'll be caught up, but you have to read the articles to see what's actually happening, follow the hyperlinks, regular critical thinking stuff. But that's not to say that everybody has time to do so. So this is why I'm here a little bit to talk to you about stuff. But I am not your only source of news. I shouldn't be.
It's nice to be a part of the decline of American journalism.
Please do your own research. Everything that I'm going to speak about is within my realm of understanding it, and it's also going to be links within a Google Doc to all of the sources that I'm going to cite. So please do your own research and come to your own conclusions objectively.
With all that this great land has given us, shouldn't we think about giving back just a little?
She's right. I'm going to renounce my citizenship.
And let's get to it. I feel like if you have an inflated sense of self that allows you to levitate over everyone, I feel like, will you ever find a place to call home? Think of the nerve someone has to take from you everything and blame you for it. Is the human condition at its core conquest?
You coming from America to here, settling in potentially in Gaza, kicking Palestinians out, a lot of people would see that as settler colonialism.
It's not really colonialism, it's a return. My grandparents were kicked out of Israel by Arabs who were trying to establish a Palestinian state, and they had to leave for their survival, and I'm just coming back and fulfilling their dream. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, I think that, and I know this is a minority view, I think colonialism gets a bad rap. Like genocide is bad, but colonizing places that are genocidal and they have bad ideology, it's good to come in and correct their views.
What do you think should happen to the people who are already in Gaza?
So I think that there's a couple of possibilities. The one that I think is the most realistic is we got to ask other countries for help. I know that Spain was willing to take a couple of million. I know Russia said they would take a couple of thousand.
To a lot of people, that would sound like you're advocating for ethnic cleansing.
I don't think so, because Palestinian isn't an ethnicity, it's an ideology, and it's an ideology that says that they want Jews dead, and so we want them as far away from Jews as possible.
Think about it. Mentioning conquest, you can't not talk about the Caribbean's most maligned pirate. No, I'm not talking about Jack Sparrow, but rather Cristoforo Colombo, or Christopher Columbus, if you care to translate the genocide pirate's name in English.
I got a bone to pick.
Cristoforo used Spain's urge to out-colonize Portugal as his way to material wealth and prestige. The insatiable urge to take over all of the known and unknown world at the time came to a head when Portugal and Spain agreed to the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Now, granted, Colombo had already discovered the Caribbean 2 years prior. For Spain and several other explorers like Amerigo Vespucci have been to the Caribbean and what's now called South America. Because, again, if you didn't know, I think it's an urban legend, but with all of the research that I did, I just couldn't take in more colonizer information at the time. So I didn't double or triple check to make sure that America was actually named after Amerigo Vespucci. You can take the time to do that. Maybe you got a higher threshold to deal with colonizing right now, but as of right now, I'm a little tapped, just a little bit. That doesn't mean I'm completely out of the game. It's just, bro, when you're learning about Cristoforo Colombo, how much more can you possibly take in? The two kingdoms, back to it.
Let's read about how the barbaric Europeans stole this country from the Native Americans.
The two kingdoms needed demarcation on who can steal, pillage, and colonize what? I mean, who has rights to the discovery? To cite the National Geographic website, the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 was an agreement between Spain and Portugal dividing the rights to colonize all lands outside of Europe. Insight. Back to it. Pope Alexander VI, who sanctioned the deal, which is a level of audacity some can only dream of.
That's indigenous whiteness to me.
Yeah.
Ideologically speaking, the superiority complex attributed to people of the Christian faith made for the justification of colonization in more ways than one, which are still prevalent today. This posturing was utilized just a year before the Treaty of Tordesillas. In 1493, with the formal decree issued by the Pope of the Catholic Church, formally recognized as a papal bull. So a Pope's decree is a papal bull. And no, that's not saying palpable, breaking it down in syllables. And yes, that was a poor attempt at a dad joke.
We was wolves, and you done lost yourself.
Back to it. As a result of Colombo's first voyage in 1492, with tales of gold and people who aren't aware of the word of Christ. To cite an article titled AD 1493, the Pope asserts rights to colonize, convert, and enslave. Pope Alexander VI issues a papal bull or decree, as I said before, quote, inter categorize is, I guess what it is in Latin, in which he authorizes Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas and its native people, wants you to take them as subjects. The decree asserts the rights of Spain and Portugal to colonize, convert, and enslave. It also justifies the enslavement of Africans. Insight. See, that's why I couldn't give you the information on Amigo Vespucci, because fam. The Spanish crown gave to Cristoforo Colombo reinforcements that were people who were formerly incarcerated to accompany him on his second voyage to the New World. So their work release program was colonizing. The people that the Spanish crown gave him to go fulfill the Pope's decree were formerly incarcerated people for whatever crimes they were incarcerated for.
Just got out of jail and I ain't going back. I ain't going back.
So they essentially gave them a work program to go colonize. That is a level of caucasity I don't think anybody can reach at this point in time in 2025.
America, fuck yeah.
But I digress. Again, he was a pirate, and an evangelical pirate, living out the prosperity gospel in real time.
Jesus is your source. Whatever you do right now, don't you stop tithing. Don't you stop sowing offerings.
Well, he also was given several priests to forcefully indoctrinate the Taino people, who were the indigenous people to the land. Again, This is why I'm not giving you info on Amigo Vespucci, because Cristoforo, Colombo, and the audacity of Spain is just a lot. When he left in 1492, one of the ships got damaged and was then subsequently used to create La Navidad. It was the first European settlement and was made to house about 40 of the pirates until Cristoforo returned. Upon his return in 1493, La Navidad was destroyed and all the pirates were martyred. The reason being, they tried to implement epistemicide and genocide through what I'll call confrontational course correction by questioning the indigenous people's belief systems, punishing them for it, trying to assault people physically, whether that be through taking their lives or essay assault, you know, the good stuff. The 40 pirates he left there wanted to exploit people in the name of the crown and Christ, and then they were dealt with. This incensed Cristoforo, so he turned to vicious retaliation, mixed with him still needing the Taino people to help him find gold. So a lot of torture along with colonial white nonsense ensued. So by the third voyage, this is when things got a little off for Cristoforo. He started making the wrong people angry, as him along with his pirate family were accused of abusing interlopers. Lord forbid he subject the interlopers to the same treatment the indigenous people faced unmercifully. So he got in trouble on his third voyage to the new land, not because he was slaughtering the inhabitants and being an overall demon. It's because he was making the people who were also helping to slaughter the inhabitants uncomfortable by like extorting them and harming them. That's when enough was enough. The crown sent an internal affairs pirate, so basically a cop pirate, to arrest him along with his cohorts, and he was barred from ever going back to what is now called Haiti. The crown only kept him in prison for a few weeks for being a torturous, gold-crazed pirate. Basically, he was put on timeout, then got out to do one more thing that was horrible. When he got the ability to travel the ocean blue again, he ended up in Jamaica from 1503 to 1504. While there, he and his compatriots overstayed their welcome, and he didn't have the capacity to do formal colonizing behavior. Like, he didn't have the weapons and dogs to shoot and sick on the people, so he had to think of something. So Cristoforo, using his Rigomontanus almanac, Rigomontanus is a famous like mathematician, astrologer, who all of the colonizers, all of the travelers used when they would go across the world to find a new world or whatnot. So, you know, a lot of them were well educated in the nautical world and in math and whatnot because of Rigomontanus. And I probably pronounced the name wrong, but I don't think I did. But that was his name in Spanish, but his actual name was way longer. And as I said before, it was an important piece of text for all of the travelers, as it mapped out the sun, the moon, and stars above. Again, poor attempt at a dad joke, especially at a time like this.
1503, 1504. He's got to get back to Spain. He doesn't have enough resources, not enough food for his crew. So he asks the natives, would you please give us some of your stock that you have collected from your farming? Now, this particular group of natives only makes exactly the amount of food they need to tie to the next crop. They don't have surplus. So they said, no, we don't have surplus, sorry. Columbus knew that 1 week hence, coincidentally, there was going to be a total lunar eclipse where the moon in its orbit around Earth enters Earth's shadow. The full moon enters Earth's shadow and disappears. And the geometry of that event, it's just a simple lunar eclipse, but the geometry is such that sunlight passes around Earth through Earth's atmosphere and takes on sunset colors that leach into Earth's shadow, giving the moon, if you can see it at all, a deep red amber hue, almost the color of blood. Columbus said, and he knew about this because he had read the tables, the eclipse tables, all right? We'd known enough about the solar system at the time we got that, okay? Actually, back then it was just the known world with Earth in the middle of the known universe. But that didn't matter. The rhythms of the universe were known. He says to the natives, if you do not give us food, my God, which is more powerful than your God, will make the moon disappear and it will turn blood red. That will happen in 1 week. You have 1 week to comply. Some of them were skeptical. What? You can't, what? Others said, shit, we got to do what this guy says. Look at the ships they came in, their guns, their power, their culture. Look what they've got. Sure enough, right on cue, the moon begins to disappear. According to that is a famous woodcut. You got this? Those viewing the video of this?
Yeah.
That is a famous woodcut, and notice the natives bowing to him, and he stands proudly because he knows the science. He knows the astronomy. He knew this. And so he invokes this to dominate people who are not yet scientifically literate. And within seconds of this beginning, they bring him all the resources he wants, and he gets, and we don't know what happened, back at the island, whether the people survived the winter, but he got back to the island.
So congratulations to them. Shout out to colonizing. Cristoforo is credited with opening the path to the enslavement of the Taino people, in addition to the exploitation of their land, accompanied by fun new diseases. He's one of the vanguards of the transatlantic slave trade, not to be outdone by the Dutch East India Company, who stole spices and people. But this isn't about them or how weirdly disturbed that genocidal pirate Cristoforo was. I'm going to call him Cristoforo because that's what his mama called him.
His mama named him Clay. I'm going to call him Clay.
Dad joke. My interest lies in you understanding the diabolical dynamic of power through the caste system, which was used to justify the pecking order, as I spoke about in the previous installment of this series during the Reconquista period. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella had soldiers questioning people's theological affiliation because they wanted to remove all Muslim influence in the region, as well as Jewish influence, just to round it out. The question involved violence because why not, right? Colonizer gonna colonize. To give you more of an understanding why this hostility existed, which proliferated Christian sectarianism, one cannot look no further than to the Moorish rule of Spain. The Iberian Peninsula wasn't necessarily dominated by the Moors, as there was different factions ruling different parts of Spain and Portugal. Consequently, they weren't necessarily united under the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordovan. Jostling for power tends to tear down any united front. There was also the Spanish wanting to repossess the lands, as well as the influence that was taken. The year 1711 is when Moors conquered the Iberian Peninsula. The term Moor is a blanket term. To cite an article on the history of Moorish Spain, the word Moors derives from the Latin Maori, a name for the Berber tribes living in Roman Mauritania, modern-day Algeria and Morocco. It has no ethnographic meaning, but can be used to refer to all Muslims, Berber, or Arab people who conquered the Iberian Peninsula. Insight. The Moorish rule of Spain contributed to architecture, agriculture, and irrigation. They built structures like the Mezquita of Cordoba, which is the third largest mosque in the world. The Moorish rule of the Iberian Peninsula ended in 1492 after one of the last Moorish kingdoms in Granada fell to Christian soldiers from Christian states fighting to reconstitute the Iberian Peninsula. There was violence under Moorish rule because, again, parts of Spain and Portugal were colonized and not uniformly ruled outside of them all being under Islam. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived relatively peacefully together under Moorish rule, but Jews and Christians had to pay a tax to practice their religion. The Tafias, which are independent Muslim principalities, as I spoke about, there being different factions of Moors taking over different parts of Europe or whatnot, they were spread about the Iberian Peninsula and had internecine conflicts amongst the Muslims and pogroms. One infamous pogrom happened in the year 1066 in a Tafia kingdom in Granada after the Muslim leadership was violently deposed and about 4,000 people of Jewish faith killed. Not to mention, in Granada, before Moorish rule was no more, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella commissioned Cristoforo Colombo to find a path to Asia in 1491, a year before the fall of the Moors in 1492. So, let that marinate in your head for a second. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, as they were actively fighting against colonialism and imperialism imposed on them by the foreign rule of the Moorish people, they were looking to impose that elsewhere. The papal bull justified their colonialism since they were doing it in the name of Christ. But not the colonialism of the Moors, because to them, they believed that Islam was Christian heresy.
That's indigenous whiteness to me.
Yeah. Now, can we blame human curiosity for colonialism? Can colonizers ever lose? The victims of colonialism aren't limited to sectarianism. Colonialism created race to make sense of the caste system.
Yes, sir! This nigga spitting. Damn, nigga!
Those who are at the top of the proverbial totem are as boastful as those who aren't. So sometimes those at the top of the totem pole only ostensibly often end up being used as weapons of the colonialists to be discarded whenever. This is the phenomena of representation politics. Representation politics are when the ruling class uses someone who presents themselves like people in society to portray them to further solidify power amongst the ruling class. Kamala Harris.
Came home and attended Hastings, as Judge Epstein shared with you. And it was in law school that I made the decision about what I wanted to do with my career. And I'll share with you, I was very excited about it, and I asked my family to gather around to share with them my decision, and so they all came around the living room and said, okay, Kamala, what have you decided you're going to do in your pursuit and fight for justice? And I said, well, I've decided I'm going to be a prosecutor. And you're all laughing because you probably have a sense of who my family is. And you can then therefore imagine that at best it was a curious decision. And in some ways, and with some, I did have to defend it like one would a thesis.
The expansion of the empire through colonization brought about mass migration from Europe to the Caribbean and to the Americas. Not only were the indigenous peoples subject to subjugation by the migrants who were the colonists, but the migrants were also subject to subjugation by the colonist migrants because of their religious beliefs. Because people just gotta fight about something, right? This is not to even forget or downplay the kidnapping / enslavement of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade, having people spread all around the Americas and the Caribbean. It's that bigotry stretches and is categorized. The creation of the idea of North America did not include all walks of life. as you see. So besides the indigenous people being all but eradicated and given reservations as a consolation prize for not being exterminated, you had African people after the end of legal chattel slavery after the Civil War, they were given ostensible citizenship. You then had Chinese people having to fight to legally be here against laws like the Chinese Exclusionary Act in 1882, which was a legal eviction and blockade from North America. You also had, this is just wild. You have to look at the acquiring / annexation of indigenous people of Mexico's land, including California, Texas, and several other places, with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo after the Mexican-American War, to then treating those same Mexicans like they're invaders.
Mexico should step up and stop this onslaught, this invasion.
The audacity of caucasity. Bruh. Another group on this long list of people that English Protestants didn't respect were the Italians. And they were also treated like second-rate humans. But through representation politics, they were indoctrinated into whiteness.
Here's a fact. I don't know whether you know or not. Sicilians were spawned by niggers.
Come again?
No, it's a fact. Yeah. You see, Sicilians have black blood pumping through their hearts. And no, if you don't believe me, you can look it up. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, you see, the Moors conquered Sicily, and the Moors were niggers.
I got a bone to pick.
This caused a strange infighting amongst Italians that presented itself prominently in America, with some blending themselves into empire rather easily because of their skin complexion and others not so much. The empire's initiation of Italian people into Americanness / whiteness began on March 14, 1891. After 11 Italian people were extrajudicially killed by lynching in New Orleans. Yeah. The reason for, if you can even call it a reason, for this happened because a police chief was martyred and several Italian people were imprisoned for it. With some being acquitted of the crime, but that doesn't matter. They were kidnapped from the prison, they were shot, they were hung, and they were discarded. Because mob rule is American exceptionalism. Nigga! This case infuriated the Italian government, and they were considering going to war with the United States.
Italian government threatened war against the United States. At the time, post-Civil War, the United States had demilitarized. The Italian Navy, with more than 1 million, was the 4th largest in the world. Last year, this topic was discussed on the YouTube channel New Orleans Insider Tours.
They threatened to blockade the Mississippi River, so the Attorney General of the United States ordered the U.S. Attorney here in New Orleans to investigate the district attorney's case against the 11 Italians, and he reported back that there was no case against the 11 Italians.
According to Mike, down and shot, 2 others were killed in a hanging. After the assassination, the Italian government threatened war against the United States. At the time, post-Civil War, the United States had demilitarized. The Italian Navy, with more than 1 million, was the 4th largest in the world. Last year, this topic was discussed on the YouTube channel New Orleans Insider Tours.
They threatened to blockade the Mississippi River, so the Attorney General of the United States ordered the U.S. Attorney here in New Orleans to investigate the district attorney's case against the 11 Italians, and he reported back that there was no case against the 11 Italians.
The United States of North America looked to extinguish the conflict quickly because after the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, and the Civil War, the coffers were dry. At the time, the U.S. was attempting to demobilize and consolidate the military, so their focus was shifted to Reconstruction era after the Civil War. To cite Abraham Lincoln's speech at the Great Central Sanitary Fair in Philadelphia in 1864, this war of ours, in its magnitude and in its duration, is one of the most terrible. It has produced a national debt and taxation unprecedented, at least in this country. It has carried mourning to almost every home until it can almost be said that the heavens are hung black in sight. The U.S. paid indemnity to Italy after the massacre to apologize. So, for you to understand how they went about linking everybody up, I need you to understand that indemnity is reparations. The U.S. paid Italy indemnity several times after they just couldn't stop martyring Italians. They just wouldn't let it go.
Bottom line was that the grand jury came out and said what happened and said, what are we going to do? Arrest the entire city. The Italian government severed diplomatic relations. Some of the people that were killed were still Italian citizens. And that's a serious thing. President Harrison sent $25,000 to Italy, and they said, okay, it's over.
There were more than a few cases where the American government paid an indemnity because Italians, many of the Italians that were lynched were not American citizens, they were Italian subjects.
By the late 19th century, anti-foreign sentiment in the United States was growing rapidly. Economic depression tightened the availability of work. Labor strikes and unrest in factories and mines were blamed on radical foreign laborers, and the American frontier was closing as public domain lands were exhausted. The Panic of 1893 sent the country into economic depression. The steep decline in the price of silver devastated Colorado's mining industry, putting thousands out of work. Italians and other immigrants were now seen as a threat to American laborers, and prejudice against them grew. Lynchings in 1893 and 1895 demonstrated the brutality directed against Italians in Colorado.
Italian people migrated to North America due to a plethora of reasons, from financial opportunities to social unrest. A large majority of Italians came to North America practicing the Catholic faith, and that brought the ire of English Protestants that were already here. They were othered because of their ethnic differences to the point of persecution, as stated earlier. The sectarianism, xenophobia, and paranoia created a divide by people we would now deem as white.
You're a stupid bitch.
Because one of the aspects of human society is white supremacy isn't a fan of those they deem as outsiders. What exacerbated the issue was a perceived kinship between newly freed Africans and Sicilians. To white supremacy, these groups posed a threat, so they devised a plot to induct Italians into whiteness. And the reason why I'm interchanging Italian and Sicilian is because Sicily is a little island off of Italy, but it's a part of Italy. But there are a lot of Sicilian people that would say I'm Sicilian first and Italian second. A lot of that is to do with the infighting and the bigotry because of the Moorish control of Spain or whatnot. And they'll run through Europe. So, again, the caucasity. To call people who are literally from the place you're from other is just a level that I don't ever want. I'm not white, but I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but yeah. Nevertheless, the white supremacist intelligentsia had to scramble to forge camaraderie with Italians. Looking through the annals of their bullshit and epistemic colonization of this nation, they struck gold, so to speak. So the person pivotal in the initiation process of Italian people into whiteness / being American was a bigot named John Pinted. He was a New York merchant that served in the Revolutionary War and came from money, which put him into positions like being the Secretary of New York Chamber of Commerce. He was also part of the financial crisis in 1792, when the first Bank of the United States, spearheaded by Alexander Hamilton,
We smoked once or twice. Alexander dabbled in. Biggest booty in the world. Alexander dammy thick. Where did Burr shoot Hamilton? In Alexander's abdomen.
was using too much credit and not enough liquid assets, ultimately defaulting on their debt, with a few people going to debtor's prison, which is prison strictly for when you owed money. John Pinted did a year for his debt. The institution of debtor's prison was ended federally in 1833, and it was affirmed as unconstitutional in 1983, although the practice in other ways still exists. Think of bail. But this episode isn't about that.
Boat, any rat, nigga, get a free throw, man down, color amber lamps, tell 'em